He entered the conference room expecting boring medical talks, but there she stood in pristine surgical attire, 3 identical girls in matching dresses, introducing her as Dr. Sarah Chen, pioneer in pediatric heart surgery. But before we dive into the full story, let me know where you're watching from and what time it is. Now subscribe to the channel and let's get started. Sarah Chen's heart pounded against her ribs as the elevator ascended to the penthouse floor of Trump Tower. Her fingers nervously traced the outline of the pregnancy test in her purse, the small plastic device that had changed everything 3 days ago. The golden doors slid open to reveal the sprawling Manhattan skyline through floor-to-ceiling windows, a view that had once thrilled her but now only intensified her anxiety. "Jonathan?" she called, stepping into the vast, open-concept living area. The minimalist decor, all chrome, glass, and white leather, had always felt impersonal to her, cold like a showroom rather than a home. Now it seemed even more forbidding. Jonathan Winthrop III emerged from his home office, tie loosened at his neck, crystal tumbler of amber liquid in hand. At 30 years old, the heir to Winthrop Pharmaceuticals carried himself with the confident ease of someone who had never been denied anything in life. "You're early," he said, checking his Patek Philippe watch. "I have a call with Tokyo in 20 minutes. Sarah inhaled deeply, summoning courage. "I need to talk to you about something important." She had rehearsed this moment all week, imagining surprise, perhaps apprehension, but in her most hopeful scenarios, joy eventually won out. They had been together for 2 years. They had discussed a future, however vaguely. With trembling fingers, she extracted the pregnancy test from her purse and handed it to him. Jonathan took it, staring at the 2 pink lines as if they were written in hieroglyphics. "You're pregnant?" His voice remained eerily calm, but something flickered across his face. Not shock or joy, but something that resembled calculation. "Yes." Sarah twisted her hands together. "I took 3 different tests. They were all positive." Jonathan's expression transformed slowly, his features hardening into something Sarah had never seen before, or perhaps had seen but ignored. He walked to the bar and poured himself another drink without offering her anything. This would ruin everything, Sarah. Absolutely everything. He drained half the glass in one swallow. "I'm about to take over as president when my father retires next year. The board would never accept me having a bastard child with well, let's be honest, a Chinese immigrant from Queens with no connections." The words hit Sarah like a physical blow, leaving her breathless. "Jonathan, we've been together for 2 years. You said you loved me." "Love?" He laughed, a hollow sound that echoed through the cavernous space. "Sarah, you were fun, exotic, different from the women in my circle. But let's be realistic. Did you really think someone like me would marry someone like you? The Winthrop dynasty doesn't need the blood of a second-rate Chinese immigrant." Sarah stood frozen, unable to process the cruelty of his words. This couldn't be the same man who had whispered sweet promises in her ear, who had taken her to the opera, who had said her intelligence was what attracted him most. Jonathan moved to his laptop, typing rapidly. "I'm transferring $50,000 to you, more than enough to solve the problem and start over somewhere else." "I'm not aborting our child," Sarah said, tears finally escaping down her cheeks. "Children," Jonathan corrected casually. "According to the latest ultrasound, it's 3, triplets." The shock made Sarah stagger backward. She had done a preliminary ultrasound but hadn't yet had the detailed scan. "3 babies? And you knew?" "Your doctor is a family friend," he replied, shrugging. "I thought you already knew. This makes everything even more impossible, obviously." Sarah watched in horror as Jonathan methodically emptied their joint account, transferring all funds to a personal account. The joint account they had opened when he insisted it would be more convenient for their shared expenses. The account where her research grant money was deposited. "You can't do that. Part of that money is mine, from my research grant." "Should have read the terms of the joint account contract, darling. Everything is in my name." When Sarah reached for her phone, Jonathan grabbed her wrist with enough force to leave marks. "Don't even think about it. I've already checked. Legally, I have no obligation until they're born, and even then, with my lawyers, I can drag any proceedings out for years. You still have, what, 3 years of medical residency ahead of you? How do you plan to finish med school and raise 3 children alone?" The calculated cruelty in his words left Sarah gasping for air. This wasn't the man she had known who had taken her to expensive dinners and talked about traveling the world together. "You're smart, Sarah. I've always admired that about you. So be smart now. Go back to your neighborhood in Queens and do something useful with your mediocre life as a medical student. You'd never be a real Winthrop anyway. Without elite education, without important connections, and now pregnant with triplets, you'll never be anything but a burden to society." He opened the penthouse door, the final gesture of expulsion. "I have a board meeting in half an hour and dinner with the Vanderbilts afterward. Don't be here when I get back." Sarah stood paralyzed, her mind racing through options that didn't exist. In the span of 20 minutes, her entire world had collapsed. The man she loved had revealed himself to be a monster. The future she had cautiously begun to envision had evaporated like morning mist. "Jonathan, please," she whispered, one final attempt. "These are your children." His face hardened further. "Not if I don't acknowledge them. And I won't." With trembling legs, Sarah gathered her purse and the few personal items she kept at his place: a toothbrush, a change of clothes, a medical textbook. It all fit into one small bag, a pathetic testament to how little space she had actually occupied in his life. "You'll regret this," she said softly, not as a threat, but as a simple statement of fact. Jonathan laughed again, that same hollow sound. "The only thing I regret is wasting 2 years with you when I could have been with someone who actually fits into my world, someone my family would accept." Sarah walked out with what remained of her dignity, her back straight despite the invisible weight crushing her shoulders. The elevator doors closed on Jonathan's cold, indifferent face, and she finally allowed herself to break down, silent sobs racking her body as she descended 30 floors back to reality. Outside, December winds cut through her thin coat. She hadn't dressed for a long journey. She had only expected to share news that would change their lives. Now she stood on the sidewalk outside Trump Tower, one small bag containing her possessions and 3 lives growing within her womb. The realization that she had nowhere to go hit her with brutal force. Her shared apartment with 3 other medical students cost more than she could afford without the joint account funds. Her elderly aunt in Queens lived in a tiny 1-bedroom apartment. The research position that had been her pride and joy now seemed precarious if Jonathan had connections to the university, which, of course, he did. A particularly vicious gust of wind brought stinging tears to her eyes, blending with those already falling. Sarah wrapped her arms around her still flat stomach, a protective gesture for the 3 tiny lives that depended solely on her now. "It's just us now," she whispered to her unborn children. "But I promise, I will give you the world." She began walking, not yet sure where to go, but knowing she needed to move, to think, to plan. Jonathan's final words echoed in her mind with every step. "Without education, without connections, and now pregnant, you'll never be anything but a burden." The cruelty of those words burned, but beneath the pain, something else stirred. A fierce determination that surprised even her. With each step away from Trump Tower, the determination grew stronger. "Watch me," she whispered into the biting wind. "Just watch what we become." She hailed a taxi, instructing the driver to take her to Queens. As the yellow cab merged into Manhattan traffic, Sarah made a silent vow to her unborn children. She would not merely survive this betrayal, she would transform it into the foundation of something extraordinary. Each cruel word Jonathan had uttered would become fuel for her ambition. Each time he said she wasn't enough, she would prove herself exceptional. Each time he claimed she would be a burden, she would become an unstoppable force. The taxi crawled through evening traffic, carrying Sarah away from the life she had thought was hers toward an uncertain future. But as the Manhattan skyline receded in the rearview mirror, Sarah Chen made a decision that would change everything. She would not just endure, she would thrive. And one day, Jonathan Winthrop III would look at her and the children he rejected and understand the magnitude of his mistake. On that cold December night, as Sarah staggered down the steps of Trump Tower with only one bag containing her personal belongings and 3 lives in her womb, his final words echoed in her mind as she faced the cutting wind. Without education, without connections, and now pregnant, you'll never be anything but a burden. The howling wind cut through Sarah's thin coat as she stood at the bus stop in Queens, her eyes fixed on the small cell phone screen displaying her account balance, $72.36. 2 weeks had passed since that fateful night in Jonathan's penthouse, and reality had crashed down with ruthless force. She had withdrawn the $50,000 he'd transferred, blood money as she thought of it, and placed it in a separate account, refusing to touch it despite her dire circumstances. That money represented everything she despised about him. She would find another purpose for it. Sarah's breath formed small clouds in the frigid air as she walked the remaining 6 blocks to her aunt's apartment building in Flushing. The elevator was out of service, again, so she climbed 5 flights of stairs, each step a reminder of how far she had fallen. When she reached apartment 5C, she paused, gathering strength before knocking. The door opened to reveal Auntie May, her face lined with the wisdom of 73 years, her eyes brightening at the sight of her niece despite the hour. "Xiao Li," she said, using Sarah's Chinese name. "Come in, come in." Sarah stepped into the tiny 1-bedroom apartment that smelled of ginger and jasmine tea. It was barely 600 square feet, smaller than Jonathan's walk-in closet, but meticulously clean and filled with photographs spanning decades. "I'm sorry to come so late, Auntie," Sarah began, her voice breaking. Auntie May shook her head, guiding Sarah to the worn sofa. "No need for explanations now. You look exhausted." Sarah couldn't hold back anymore. The tears she had been fighting all day streamed down her face as she sank into her aunt's embrace, the same arms that had comforted her after her parents' fatal car accident 12 years earlier. "I lost everything, Auntie," she whispered between sobs. "My apartment, my research position, and I'm pregnant with triplets." To her surprise, Auntie May didn't bombard her with questions or judgments. She simply held Sarah tighter, stroking her hair as she had when Sarah was a child. "Then we start again," Auntie May said simply. "This couch opens into a bed. It's yours for as long as you need." That night, lying on the lumpy sofa bed, Sarah placed her hands on her still flat stomach and whispered promises to her unborn children, promises of safety, of love, of a future built with determination. The morning sickness hit with brutal intensity. Sarah barely made it to the bathroom, retching violently while Auntie May held back her hair. This had become their morning ritual over the past week. "You need to see doctor," Auntie May insisted, handing Sarah a damp washcloth. "I have an appointment next week," Sarah replied weakly. "I'm trying to find a clinic that takes patients without insurance." Her university health coverage had mysteriously terminated 3 days after the confrontation with Jonathan, another casualty of his influence. When she'd called the administration office, they'd cited a clerical error that would take several weeks to resolve. That afternoon, Sarah stood in the marble lobby of Winthrop Pharmaceuticals, heart hammering against her ribs. She had dressed carefully in her best interview outfit, a navy skirt suit she'd purchased secondhand for clinical rotations. Security guards eyed her suspiciously as she approached the reception desk. "I need to see Jonathan Winthrop," she said, mustering all her confidence. The receptionist's perfectly arched eyebrows rose slightly. "Do you have an appointment?" "No, but if you tell him Sarah Chen is here—" "I'm sorry, but Mr. Winthrop sees no one without an appointment. You can leave your contact information, and someone will get back to you." Sarah stood her ground. "Please, just tell him I'm here. It's important." The receptionist sighed, picking up the phone and murmuring something Sarah couldn't hear. After a brief conversation, she hung up and smiled politely. "I'm afraid Mr. Winthrop is in meetings all day. Perhaps you could try calling his assistant to schedule a time next week." As the words left the receptionist's mouth, Sarah caught sight of a familiar figure through the glass walls of the 30th floor executive suite. Jonathan, standing by the window, looking down directly at her. Their eyes met across the distance. His expression remained impassive as he turned away, disappearing from view. "Security will escort you out," the receptionist added, her smile never wavering. Two guards materialized beside Sarah, gently but firmly guiding her toward the revolving doors. She didn't resist, the humiliation burning hot in her chest. Outside, the January wind whipped through her inadequate coat as her phone pinged with an email notification. Heart racing, thinking perhaps Jonathan had changed his mind, she pulled out her phone. The email was from the university. "Dear Ms. Chen, we regret to inform you that your research grant has been revoked due to budgetary cuts. Additionally, your deferred enrollment for the upcoming semester has been denied due to administrative constraints. Sincerely, Office of Academic Affairs." Sarah's knees nearly buckled. Without the research position and with no possibility of continuing her studies in her condition, her dream of becoming a doctor seemed to be slipping away. 2 months later, Sarah stood behind the counter at Reliable Pharmacy in Queens, her feet swollen in worn sneakers, the too small smock barely concealing her growing belly at 16 weeks pregnant. She had been hired as an assistant pharmacist, her medical training making her overqualified, yet her lack of a pharmacy tech certification making her underpaid. "Sarah, customer waiting for translation," Mr. Park called from the back. Sarah nodded, moving toward an elderly Chinese woman clutching a prescription. In fluent Mandarin, Sarah explained the dosage instructions and possible side effects, the woman's face relaxing with understanding and gratitude. This was her morning job. In the afternoons, she cleaned houses in the more affluent neighborhoods of Queens and Long Island. At night, she translated medical documents from English to Mandarin for a small online service, often working until 2 in the morning before starting all over again at 7. The bell chimed, and Sarah looked up to see a familiar face, Dr. Rebecca Goldstein, one of her professors from medical school. "Sarah?" Dr. Goldstein approached the counter, surprise evident in her voice. "I haven't seen you since... What happened? You were one of our most promising students." Sarah's throat tightened. "Circumstances changed," she managed, unconsciously placing a hand on her stomach. Dr. Goldstein's eyes followed the movement, understanding dawning. "I see. The department said something about a leave of absence." "That's what they're calling it," Sarah replied, unable to keep the bitterness from her voice. "My research grant was revoked due to budgetary cuts." Dr. Goldstein frowned. "That's odd. The Winthrop Foundation actually increased funding to the department this year." Sarah's heart froze. "The Winthrop Foundation?" "Yes, they're our biggest donor. They've been especially generous since Jonathan Winthrop joined the Board of Trustees last year." The pieces clicked into place with sickening clarity. Jonathan hadn't just abandoned her, he was actively sabotaging her future. Later that week, Sarah received confirmation from an unexpected source. Lisa, a former classmate, called her out of the blue. "I thought you should know," Lisa said hesitantly. "There are rumors that the Winthrop family suggested you didn't fit the profile of the university. Professor Carlton let it slip after too many drinks at the department party." Sarah thanked her for the information, hanging up with a strange calm. The rage would come later, but for now, she focused on survival. The bathroom floor was cold against Sarah's knees as she vomited for the 3rd time that day. 6 months pregnant with triplets, her body strained under the burden. The morning shift at the pharmacy had been grueling, followed by cleaning 2 sprawling houses in Great Neck. Her hands were raw from chemical cleaners, her back spasming in protest. "Sarah?" Auntie May called through the bathroom door. "You need to eat something." "In a minute," Sarah managed, rinsing her mouth with tap water. The mirror reflected a stranger, dark circles under her eyes, cheekbones too pronounced despite her swollen midsection. She looked nothing like the confident medical student who had once caught the eye of Jonathan Winthrop III. Later that night, Sarah sat at the tiny kitchen table, translating medical documents on her laptop while Auntie May slept. An article on cardiac tissue transplantation caught her attention, specifically the high rejection rates in pediatric patients. Something about the methodology seemed flawed. Sarah could see a different approach, a better way to prepare the tissue. She scribbled notes in the margins of her translation, an idea forming. It was probably nothing, but it nagged at her, this potential solution hiding in plain sight. The next day brought the final humiliation. Sarah sat in the waiting room of Queens Municipal Hospital, the same hospital where she had once done clinical rotations as a promising medical student. Now she was here as a patient in the free prenatal clinic, applying for Medicaid and WIC benefits to ensure proper care for her babies. Sarah Chen? A nurse called her name, not recognizing her former student. In the examination room, Sarah changed into a thin paper gown, wincing as it crinkled loudly, barely covering her dignity. The obstetrician, Dr. Patel, entered with a sympathetic smile. "Multiple gestation, high-risk pregnancy," she noted, reviewing Sarah's chart. "And you're working 3 jobs?" Sarah nodded, avoiding eye contact. "I don't have much choice." Dr. Patel's expression softened. "Sarah, you need rest. Your blood pressure is concerning, and with triplets, you're at high risk for premature labor." "I can't afford rest," Sarah replied simply. "There's no one else to pay the bills." The doctor sighed, recognizing the impossible situation. "Let's at least see how these little ones are doing." The ultrasound revealed 3 distinct heartbeats, strong despite everything. Tears filled Sarah's eyes at the sound, the first moment of joy she'd felt in months. "They're fighters," Dr. Patel observed. "Like their mother," Sarah whispered. That night, after a double shift at the pharmacy covering for a sick colleague, Sarah finally broke down. The exhaustion, the nausea, the aching feet and back, the humiliation of applying for public assistance, it all crashed over her in a tidal wave of despair. Sitting on the bathroom floor of Auntie May's apartment at 2 in the morning, Sarah sobbed until she had no tears left. Her hands cradled her swollen belly, feeling the occasional flutter of movement within. "I'm sorry," she whispered to her unborn children. "I'm sorry I can't give you the life you deserve. I'm sorry your father doesn't want you. I'm sorry I'm not stronger." The words hung in the silence of the tiny bathroom with its cracked mirror and dripping faucet, so different from the marble and gold fixtures of Jonathan's penthouse. Slowly, Sarah pulled herself up, gripping the edge of the sink as she confronted her reflection in the cracked mirror. The woman who stared back was exhausted, yes, but something else burned in her eyes, something that had been there all along, waiting to be acknowledged. Determination. "Never again," she whispered to the babies stirring inside her. "Never again will anyone define who we are or what we can achieve." In that moment, Sarah made a solemn vow before the cracked bathroom mirror. She would transform each cruel word Jonathan had spoken into fuel for her success. Each time he said she wasn't enough, she would prove herself extraordinary. Each time he claimed she would be a burden, she would become an unstoppable force. As she stroked her belly, Sarah made the decision that would change everything. She would not just survive, but thrive. And someday, Jonathan Winthrop III would look at her and the children he rejected and understand the magnitude of his error. That night, Sarah didn't know that the $50,000 Jonathan had given her to solve the problem would become the initial investment in a company that would one day be worth more than the entire Winthrop Pharmaceuticals. Sarah stared at the $50,000 in her separate account, the numbers on the screen glowing in the darkness of Auntie May's apartment. For months, she had refused to touch what she considered blood money, but tonight, illuminated by the soft light of her laptop, she saw it differently, not as a payoff, but as potential. The idea that had been forming in her mind since she noticed the flawed methodology in cardiac tissue transplantation now seemed like more than just a theoretical exercise. It could be a solution, a pathway, perhaps even a future. A sharp pain interrupted her thoughts, causing her to gasp and clutch her abdomen. At 32 weeks pregnant with triplets, her body strained under the weight of 3 growing babies. Dr. Patel had warned her at her last appointment that her blood pressure was dangerously high. "You need bed rest, Sarah," the doctor had insisted. "These babies could come any day now." But Sarah couldn't afford bed rest, not with rent to pay, groceries to buy, and medical bills mounting despite Medicaid. So she continued working her 3 jobs, ignoring the swelling in her feet, the spots that sometimes danced before her eyes, and the increasing frequency of Braxton Hicks contractions. On this particular Tuesday in July, Sarah stood behind the counter at Reliable Pharmacy, ringing up a customer's blood pressure medication when she felt it. A different kind of pain, sharper and more insistent than the practice contractions she'd grown accustomed to. "Are you all right, miss?" the elderly customer asked, noting Sarah's sudden pallor. "I'm fine," Sarah replied automatically, handing over the prescription bag with a forced smile. Another contraction hit, stronger this time, causing her to grip the counter's edge. Mr. Park looked over from where he was stocking shelves. "Sarah, you don't look good." Before she could respond, a warm gush of fluid ran down her legs, pooling on the linoleum floor beneath her. Sarah looked down in shock, her mind struggling to process what was happening. "My water broke," she whispered, then louder. "My water broke. The babies are coming." The pharmacy erupted into controlled chaos. Mr. Park called an ambulance while a customer who identified herself as a retired nurse helped Sarah to a chair. "How far along are you?" the nurse asked, checking Sarah's pulse. 32 weeks. Triplets," Sarah managed between shallow breaths. The nurse's eyes widened, but her voice remained calm. "The ambulance will be here soon. Just breathe with me." By the time the paramedics arrived, Sarah's contractions were coming every 4 minutes. As they loaded her into the ambulance, she had one clear thought. She was about to become a mother, and she would be facing it entirely alone. The delivery room at Queens Municipal Hospital buzzed with urgent activity. 3 separate neonatal teams stood ready, equipment prepared for the premature triplets. "Sarah, we're going to need to perform an emergency C-section," Dr. Patel explained, her voice steady despite the urgency. "Your blood pressure is too high and baby B is showing signs of distress." Sarah nodded, fear and determination warring within her. "Save my babies," she whispered as the anesthesiologist administered the spinal block. The surgical team worked with practiced efficiency. Within minutes, Sarah heard the first thin, reedy cry that announced her firstborn's arrival into the world. "Baby A is a girl," Dr. Patel announced. "Very small but good lung function." Tears streamed down Sarah's face as the second and third cries joined the first, each one miraculous in its fragility and strength. 3 beautiful girls, the doctor confirmed. "They're being taken to the NICU immediately. They're very premature, but they're fighters." "Can I see them?" Sarah asked, straining to lift her head. A nurse briefly held each tiny bundle near Sarah's face before they were whisked away to the neonatal intensive care unit. Each baby was impossibly small, with translucent skin and miniature features. Yet in that brief glimpse, Sarah saw something that made her heart swell with fierce love and protection. They were perfect, and they were hers. As the surgical team closed her incision, Sarah made a silent promise to her daughters. They would never know the rejection she had experienced. They would grow up knowing they were wanted, cherished, and enough. Always enough. The NICU was a world of beeping monitors, hushed voices, and incubators housing the most vulnerable patients. Sarah sat beside 3 tiny incubators, her body still recovering from surgery, her heart torn between joy and terror. Olivia, Emma, and Sophia, names she had chosen during quiet nights when she allowed herself to hope, Each weighed less than 3 pounds. "They're doing remarkably well, considering," the neonatologist, Dr. Rivera, explained. "Their lung function is better than expected for 32 weekers, though they'll need respiratory support for a while. The biggest challenges will be maintaining their body temperature and teaching them to feed." Sarah nodded, absorbing every word, filing away every piece of information about her daughter's condition. The medical student in her analyzed vital signs and medication dosages, while the new mother in her simply marveled at their perfect tiny fingers and the delicate curves of their ears. Auntie May arrived, her weathered face a mixture of worry and joy as she peered through the incubator windows. "So tiny," she whispered in Mandarin, "but strong like their mother." She pressed a container of homemade bone broth into Sarah's hands. "You must regain strength. For them." In the days that followed, Sarah established a new routine. She would spend mornings and evenings at the NICU, talking and singing to her daughters, placing her hands through the incubator ports to let them grasp her finger. During the afternoons, she would return to Auntie May's apartment to pump breast milk, rest briefly, and work on her laptop, transcribing medical documents to maintain some income. She brought her textbooks to the NICU, studying beside the incubators during the quiet hours when the babies slept. The nurses grew accustomed to finding her there, medical journal in one hand, the other reaching through an incubator port to maintain contact with one of her daughters. "You should rest more," one night nurse admonished gently. "They'll be here when you get back." "I know," Sarah replied, not looking up from her book, "but I won't miss a minute more than necessary." What she didn't say was that these quiet hours beside her daughters were when she felt most at peace, most certain of her path forward. It was during one such night, as she transcribed a series of case studies on pediatric heart transplants, that the pattern she had noticed months ago crystallized into something more concrete. Sarah sat up straighter, her fingers flying across the keyboard as she cross-referenced multiple studies. There was a correlation between preparation methods of cardiac tissue and rejection rates that no one seemed to have identified. The current protocol treated all tissue the same way, but Sarah could see that different preparation methods produced statistically significant differences in outcomes. She began scribbling notes in her journal, drawing diagrams and writing formulas, occasionally pausing to check on the sleeping infants or to adjust her position to alleviate the pain from her healing incision. "What are you working on?" Dr. Rivera asked, stopping by during late-night rounds. Sarah hesitated, then decided to share. "I've noticed a pattern in tissue preparation for pediatric heart transplants. The current protocol doesn't account for donor-recipient genetic variations, but if we modified the preparation based on these factors..." She explained her theory, growing more animated as she spoke. Dr. Rivera listened with increasing interest. "That's potentially groundbreaking," he said when she finished. "Have you considered pursuing this research formally?" Sarah's expression clouded. "My academic situation is complicated right now." "Research doesn't have to happen in a university," Dr. Rivera replied thoughtfully. "There are other pathways." That conversation planted a seed that continued to grow in the following weeks as the triplets gained strength. By the time they reached what would have been 36 weeks gestation, all 3 girls had nearly doubled their birth weights. Olivia, the firstborn and most assertive, was already attempting to remove her feeding tube. Emma, quieter but observant, tracked movement with alert eyes. Sophia, the smallest but most determined, had overcome a lung infection that had terrified Sarah for 3 sleepless days. It was a crisp October morning when Sarah finally brought her daughters home to Auntie May's tiny apartment. The logistics had seemed impossible, 3 babies in a space barely adequate for 2 adults. But Sarah had spent weeks preparing, rearranging furniture and finding second-hand baby equipment that could be adapted for triplets. 3 second-hand cribs were squeezed into what had once been Auntie May's dining area. A changing table made from a repurposed dresser stood against one wall. Donated baby clothes, carefully washed and sorted, filled plastic bins labeled with each girl's name. "Welcome home," Sarah whispered, carrying Olivia while Auntie May followed with Emma and Sophia. The babies, now almost 5 pounds each, blinked in the new environment, tiny fists waving. That night, after feeding and changing all 3 infants and finally getting them to sleep, Sarah collapsed onto the sofa bed that had been her home for months. Exhaustion pulled at her, but her mind raced with plans and possibilities. The $50,000 remained untouched in her account. Her research notes on cardiac tissue preparation had expanded to fill 2 notebooks, and in her email inbox sat a message from a patent attorney who offered pro bono services to medical innovators. Sarah glanced at the sleeping babies, their identical faces peaceful in repose. Then she opened her laptop and began to write, outlining her methodology for cardiac tissue preparation in careful, precise language. By dawn, she had completed a draft of the patent application. 3 days later, she sat at a small desk wedged between the cribs and the sofa bed, feeding Sophia with one arm while typing email responses to the patent attorney with the other. Emma and Olivia slept nearby, their breathing synchronized in slumber. "This is just the beginning," Sarah whispered to Sophia, who gazed up at her with trusting eyes. "I'm going to build something for all of us." In the weeks that followed, Sarah established a rigorous system. While the babies napped, she worked on her patent application and research. During their alert periods, she engaged with them, reading medical journals aloud as if they were bedtime stories, describing the cardiovascular system while changing diapers, explaining molecular biology during bath time. The letter arrived on a Tuesday, exactly 3 months after the triplets' birth. Sarah's hands trembled as she opened the envelope from the U.S. Patent Office. Inside was confirmation of her preliminary patent filing for novel method of cardiac tissue preparation for transplantation. She held the paper to her chest, tears streaming down her face. In the makeshift nursery, 3 identical faces watched her with curious eyes. "We did it," she told her daughters, kneeling beside their playmat. "This is our future." Auntie May found her there, surrounded by her daughters, the patent letter still clutched in her hand. "Good news?" the older woman asked. "A beginning," Sarah replied, her voice steady with newfound certainty. That night, as she organized a study space beside the cribs, Sarah couldn't know that 15 years later, in a crowded auditorium in Boston, the man who rejected them would witness the empire she built from that single idea born in her hours of greatest desperation. 5 years had passed since that night in Auntie May's apartment when Sarah had made her decision to invest Jonathan's blood money in her patent application. The certificate from the U.S. Patent Office, now framed, hung on the wall of her modest office in the Queen's Science Incubator, a testament to how far she had come and how far she still had to go. "Mama, look!" 5-year-old Olivia tugged at Sarah's lab coat, pointing at the colorful diagram on Sarah's computer screen. "Is that a heart?" Sarah smiled, lifting her daughter onto her lap. "Yes, that's a heart. And these lines show how we're trying to make sick hearts better." Emma, always the most analytical of the triplets, peered at the screen with serious eyes. "It looks different from the pictures in your book." "That's because this is a special kind of heart diagram," Sarah explained. "It shows how the medicine we're working on affects the tissue." Sophia, the quietest of the 3, was sitting cross-legged on the floor, carefully arranging colored pencils by spectrum. She looked up. "Will it help children like us?" Sarah's heart squeezed. At 5, her daughters were already asking profound questions. "Yes, sweetheart, especially children." The makeshift daycare corner of her small office was littered with educational toys, medical picture books, and small lab coats Sarah had sewn herself, an attempt to make her daughters feel included in her work. The Chen Medical Innovations headquarters consisted of this single cubicle in the Queen's Science Incubator, a program for medical startups that couldn't afford proper office space. Today was a special day. Sarah had finally completed her medical degree, studying nights and weekends while building her company and raising her daughters. There had been no formal graduation ceremony, Sarah had chosen to receive her diploma by mail rather than walk across a stage with no family to cheer for her. But she had put on a makeshift graduation gown fashioned from a black tablecloth, and the triplets had made paper caps to match. "Dr. Mama!" they had chanted, clapping as Sarah struck a pose in their tiny apartment. Now, as she prepared for her meeting with Winthrop Pharmaceuticals, she felt a flutter of anxiety. This would be her first presentation to a major pharmaceutical company, and of all companies, it had to be Jonathan's. She had avoided any direct contact with Winthrop for years, focusing instead on smaller investors and research grants. But her technology had advanced to the point where she needed a major partner for clinical trials, and Winthrop, with its extensive cardiovascular division, was the logical choice. "Girls, remember what we practiced?" Sarah asked, straightening their matching dresses. "We sit quietly and draw," Olivia recited, "and we only speak if someone asks us a question." "And we say pleased to meet you and shake hands properly," added Emma. "And we don't mention that we don't have a daddy," whispered Sophia, her eyes serious. Sarah knelt down, taking Sophia's small hands in hers. "You don't need to whisper that, sweetheart. It's not a secret, and it's not something to be ashamed of. We're a complete family just as we are." The receptionist at the Winthrop Pharmaceuticals satellite office in Queens, a much smaller operation than their Manhattan headquarters, looked up in surprise when Sarah entered with 3 identical little girls in tow. "Dr. Chen? For the 1:30 meeting?" "Yes, that's right." The receptionist eyed the triplets uncertainly. "I wasn't aware you'd be bringing guests." "My daughters will sit quietly during the presentation," Sarah assured her, maintaining a professional tone despite the obvious disapproval. The conference room was sleek but smaller than Sarah had expected. 5 men in expensive suits were already seated, their expressions ranging from curiosity to barely concealed annoyance at the presence of children. "Dr. Chen, thank you for coming," said the oldest man, extending his hand. "I'm Dr. Harrison, head of cardiovascular research at Winthrop." As Sarah began setting up her presentation, she noticed one of the men studying her with particular interest. When introductions went around the table, he identified himself as Richard Tanner, Senior Vice President of Strategy. "Have we met before, Dr. Chen?" he asked, his brow furrowed in concentration. Sarah maintained a neutral expression. "I don't believe so, Mr. Tanner." But she recognized him. He had been at Jonathan's penthouse once for a dinner party, watching with amusement as Jonathan had introduced Sarah as his exotic girlfriend from med school. The memory stung, but Sarah pushed it aside, focusing instead on her presentation. For the next 45 minutes, Sarah outlined her methodology for cardiac tissue preparation, presenting data from her preliminary studies showing significantly reduced rejection rates in animal models. The triplets, true to their promise, sat quietly in a corner, drawing in their sketchbooks and occasionally glancing up at their mother with pride. As Sarah concluded, Dr. Harrison nodded thoughtfully. "Your results are impressive, Dr. Chen. However, without clinical trials in humans, this remains largely theoretical." "That's precisely why I'm seeking a partnership," Sarah replied. "My methodology is sound, but I need resources for proper clinical testing." Richard Tanner leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. "Your idea is interesting but quite risky, Dr. Chen. Winthrop typically partners with established researchers with institutional backing. May I ask what university is supporting this research?" The question was deliberately pointed. Sarah kept her voice steady. "Chen Medical Innovations is an independent research entity. My work is not currently affiliated with any academic institution." Another executive, who had introduced himself as the financial officer, raised an eyebrow. "So you're operating out of where exactly?" "The Queen's Science Incubator," Sarah answered honestly. "It's a startup space for medical innovators." A barely perceptible smirk passed between several of the men. Sarah felt her cheeks warm but maintained her composure. "Gentlemen, I understand your hesitation," she said, "but I'd encourage you to focus on the data rather than the address. My methodology could reduce pediatric transplant rejection by up to 60%. That translates to hundreds of children's lives saved annually. Dr. Harrison cleared his throat. We appreciate your time, Dr. Chen. We'll need to discuss internally and get back to you. As the meeting concluded, Richard Tanner approached Sarah while she was packing up her materials. Now I remember, he said quietly. You were Jonathan's friend a few years back. Sarah met his gaze steadily. Yes, I was. His eyes flicked to the triplets, who were helping each other put on their backpacks. Interesting. Jonathan never mentioned children. There's a lot Jonathan never mentioned, Sarah replied evenly. Tanner's smile didn't reach his eyes. I'll be sure to discuss your proposal with him personally, though I should warn you, Jonathan isn't particularly sentimental about past relationships. The implied threat was clear. Tanner would make sure Jonathan knew exactly who was seeking a partnership with Winthrop. Sarah gathered her daughters, thanking the executives politely before leaving the building with her head held high. Outside, Olivia tugged on her hand. Did they like your medicine, Mama? Sarah knelt down to her daughter's level. I'm not sure yet, sweetheart, but it doesn't matter. If they don't want to help us make it, we'll find someone who does. They looked at us funny, observed Emma, like we weren't supposed to be there. Some people think children don't belong in business meetings, Sarah explained, but I think differently. You three are the reason I work so hard. You deserve to see it. That evening, as Sarah tucked the girls into bed in their small apartment, a slight upgrade from Auntie May's place, though the elderly woman still lived with them, her phone pinged with an email notification. Dr. Chen. After careful consideration, Winthrop Pharmaceuticals has decided not to pursue a partnership regarding your cardiac tissue preparation methodology at this time. While your preliminary results show promise, we feel the approach is too experimental for our current portfolio. We wish you success in your future endeavors. Regards, Winthrop Pharmaceuticals Research Division. Sarah wasn't surprised, but the rejection still stung. She had known it was a long shot, especially once Tanner recognized her, but she had hoped the merit of her research might outweigh personal history. 2 weeks later, Sarah was cleaning the office cubicle when her phone rang. The caller ID showed a Boston area code. Dr. Chen speaking, she answered, balancing the phone between her ear and shoulder as she organized papers. Dr. Chen, this is Dr. Maxwell Goldstein from Boston Children's Hospital. I read your paper on cardiac tissue preparation in the Journal of Experimental Cardiology. I'm calling because I have a patient, a 7-year-old boy who's rejecting his 3rd heart transplant. We've tried everything in the standard protocol. Sarah's pulse quickened. And you're interested in my methodology? Frankly, yes. We're desperate. This child won't survive another rejection episode. I know your protocol is experimental, but his parents are willing to try anything at this point. Sarah closed her eyes, taking a deep breath. This was what she had been working toward, a chance to prove her method could save lives. I'd need to review his case details before I could adapt the protocol specifically for him, she said. There are variables based on donor-recipient genetic markers. I'll send everything immediately, Dr. Goldstein promised. How quickly could you provide a customized protocol? Given complete data, 48 hours. That night, after the triplets were asleep, Sarah worked until dawn, meticulously analyzing the case files Dr. Goldstein had sent and adapting her protocol for the specific genetic markers of the young patient. As she prepared to send the finalized procedure, she included a note. Dr. Goldstein, I've customized the protocol based on Michael's specific case. Please follow the preparation steps exactly as outlined. I'll be available by phone throughout the procedure if you have any questions. This is an opportunity to save not just Michael, but potentially thousands of children in similar situations. I trust you'll document everything carefully regardless of the outcome. Wishing the best for your patient. Dr. Sarah Chen. For the next 3 days, Sarah jumped every time her phone rang. The triplets noticed her anxiety, clustering around her with worried expressions. "Is your medicine helping the sick boy, Mama?" Sophia asked during dinner on the third day. "I hope so, sweetheart. We'll know soon." As if on cue, her phone rang. Dr. Goldstein's name flashed on the screen. Sarah's hand trembled slightly as she answered. "Dr. Chen." Goldstein's voice came through, sounding tired but elated. "The patient not only survived, but his rejection markers are at the lowest levels I've ever seen in a case like this. It's nothing short of remarkable." Sarah closed her eyes, tears of relief streaming down her face. That's wonderful news." "This goes beyond wonderful, Dr. Chen. This is potentially revolutionary. I'd like to implement your protocol in other cases, with your guidance. And I think it's time the medical community paid serious attention to your work." Within weeks, Sarah's phone began ringing regularly. First, it was another hospital in Boston, then one in Philadelphia, then Mayo Clinic. A journal wanted to interview her about her methodology. A medical conference invited her to present her findings. She hired her first employee, a recent biochemistry graduate who had been rejected by the major pharmaceutical companies for lack of experience. Together, they began adapting the protocol for different patient profiles. 6 months after Michael's successful treatment, Sarah received the call that would truly change everything. "Dr. Chen, this is Dr. Margaret Wei, Chief of Pediatric Cardiac Surgery at Boston Children's Hospital. We want to implement your protocol in all our pediatric heart transplant cases, and we're prepared to offer a significant contract to make that happen." That evening, Sarah hung the contract, her first major hospital implementation agreement, on the wall beside her patent certificate. The triplets helped her unpack equipment for the new, larger office space she had just leased. "Will we work with you when we grow up, Mama?" Olivia asked, carefully arranging test tubes in a rack. Sarah smiled at her daughters, these 3 miracles who had transformed her life in ways she never could have imagined. "If that's what you want, or you might discover something completely different that you love." "I want to be a doctor like you," declared Emma, "and find new medicines." "I want to build special machines to help sick people," added Sophia. "I want to make sure nobody can be mean to people who need help," said Olivia with the fierce determination that had characterized her from birth. Sarah hugged them close, marveling at their already distinct personalities and dreams. "Whatever you choose, you'll be amazing at it." As she hung the framed contract on the wall of the new office, Sarah couldn't possibly imagine that within a decade she would be refusing a multi-billion-dollar acquisition offer from Winthrop Pharmaceuticals, the company owned by the man who had rejected her. The framed contract hung on the wall of Chen Medical Innovations' new office space, a tangible symbol of how far Sarah had come in just 5 years. Now, as she prepared for a critical investor meeting, she couldn't help but marvel at the transformation. Her company had grown from a single cubicle to a proper office with a small lab, 3 employees, and partnerships with 5 major hospitals across the eastern seaboard. "Dr. Chen, the investors are here," announced May, Sarah's assistant and first official employee. Sarah straightened her navy blazer, purchased second-hand but carefully tailored to fit her petite frame, and nodded. "Send them in, and please check on the girls in the conference room." The door opened to admit 3 venture capitalists in expensive suits, their expressions curious as they surveyed the modest but immaculate office space. "Dr. Chen, thank you for meeting with us," said the lead investor, extending his hand. "Your cardiac tissue preparation protocol has been generating quite the buzz in medical circles." Sarah smiled confidently, a far cry from the nervous medical student who had once stood trembling in Jonathan's penthouse. "The buzz is warranted. We've reduced rejection rates in pediatric heart transplants by 68% across all implementing hospitals." As Sarah led them through her presentation, detailing expansion plans and new applications for other organ transplants, she spoke with the quiet authority of someone who knew her worth, a stark contrast to the woman Jonathan had dismissed as mediocre 5 years earlier. Halfway through the meeting, the conference room door opened slightly, and 3 identical faces peeked in. The investors turned, surprised by the interruption. "I apologize," Sarah said smoothly. "My daughters are usually very good about meeting protocol." She gave the girls a gentle but firm look. The lead investor smiled. "No apology necessary. Are those triplets? Remarkable resemblance." "Yes, they're 10 now, my greatest accomplishments." Sarah's voice held pride without apology. "Girls, please remember our rule about meetings." "Sorry, Mama," they chorused before quietly closing the door. "You raised triplets while running a medical startup?" asked the female investor, clearly impressed. "That's extraordinary." "We manage," Sarah replied simply, redirecting the conversation back to business. After the investors left, with promises of term sheets to follow, Sarah found the triplets in the small conference room that doubled as their after-school space. Each girl was engaged in her own activity, their distinct personalities evident despite their identical appearances. Olivia sat with a legal pad, carefully drafting what appeared to be a contract. At 10, she had already developed a fascination with rules and justice, often creating elaborate agreements for her sisters to sign regarding everything from toy sharing to bathroom scheduling. "Mama, is this clause correct?" she asked, showing Sarah a surprisingly sophisticated paragraph about intellectual property rights. "I was reading your patent documents, and I think you could strengthen this part." Sarah read it, eyebrows raised in surprise at her daughter's comprehension. "This is actually quite good, Olivia. Where did you learn about intellectual property clauses?" "From the books on your shelf. The legal ones were more interesting than the medical ones." Across the table, Emma sat surrounded by printouts of brain scans, meticulously comparing them and making notes. Of the three, she most resembled Sarah in her methodical approach to research. "These neural pathways show different responses to the same stimulus," Emma observed, pointing to highlighted sections. "It's fascinating how the brain rewires itself." "That's called neuroplasticity," Sarah explained, impressed by her daughter's observations. "It's a complex concept, even for medical students." "I know. I read about it in your journal subscription. The password was too easy to guess, Mama." Sarah made a mental note to change her passwords, though she couldn't help feeling proud of Emma's initiative. In the corner, Sophia was bent over a sketch pad, designing what appeared to be a medical device. Of the three, she was the most creative, combining artistic talent with a surprisingly intuitive grasp of engineering principles. "It's a miniature heart pump," Sophia explained when Sarah asked about her drawing. "But instead of external power, it uses the body's own electrical system. Do you think it could work?" Sarah studied the drawing with genuine interest. "It's an innovative concept. There are some practical challenges, but the core idea has merit." Later that evening, in their modest but comfortable apartment in Queens, Sarah prepared dinner while the girls set the table. They had long since outgrown Auntie May's tiny place. The elderly woman now had her own room in their 3-bedroom apartment, her presence a constant reminder of who had stood by Sarah in her darkest days. "Girls, I have some news," Sarah announced as they sat down to eat. "I've been accepted into the PhD program in bioengineering at MIT." The triplets erupted in cheers. They had witnessed their mother studying late into the night for months to prepare her application. "How will you go to school in Boston when we live here?" asked Sophia, always practical. "Most of it will be remote learning, with intensive sessions on campus every few months. And sometimes you'll come with me," Sarah explained. "It won't be easy, but this degree will help our company grow even more." "We can help with chores and cooking," offered Emma. "I've been studying efficient household management systems." Sarah smiled at her daughters, these remarkable girls who had never known a father's love but had never lacked for determination or ambition. "I know you will. We're a team, remember?" That night, after tucking the girls into bed, Sarah sat at her desk reviewing quarterly reports. Her company was growing steadily, but not fast enough to compete with pharmaceutical giants like Winthrop. She needed this PhD and the credibility and connections it would bring. Her phone pinged with an email notification. It was from her newly hired public relations consultant, forwarding a press release. Winthrop Pharmaceuticals announces leadership transition. Jonathan Winthrop III, named Executive Vice President, positioned to succeed. Father as CEO attached was a photo of Jonathan at a press conference, looking every inch the successful heir, handsome, polished, and utterly self-assured. Sarah studied his face, searching for traces of the man she had once thought she loved. She found none. With a decisive click, she closed the email and returned to her work. Jonathan Winthrop belonged to her past, not her future. 6 months later, Sarah stood at the podium in MIT's engineering auditorium, defending her dissertation proposal to a panel of distinguished professors. The triplets sat in the front row, each taking notes in their own way, Olivia analyzing the procedural aspects, Emma absorbing the scientific content, and Sophia sketching conceptual diagrams of Sarah's proposed research. Dr. Chen, your proposal to expand your cardiac tissue methodology to other organs represents a significant advancement in transplantation science, commented the department chair. However, the timeline seems ambitious given your other commitments. Sarah nodded, acknowledging the concern. My company provides the perfect testing ground for my research. Each advancement in the lab translates directly to clinical applications. As for time management, she glanced at her daughters with a smile. I've had excellent training in efficiency. The committee approved her proposal unanimously. That evening, as they celebrated with ice cream in a small Cambridge shop, a well-dressed woman approached their table. Dr. Chen, I thought that was you. I'm Barbara Whitfield from the Boston Globe. I'm writing a feature on women entrepreneurs in medical technology. Would you be interested in an interview? 2 weeks later, Sarah sat in her office, staring at the magazine article that had resulted from that chance meeting. The next great medical innovator. How Dr. Sarah Chen is transforming transplant medicine. The feature included photos of Sarah in her lab and with her daughters, along with quotes about her journey from medical student to CEO. The article made no mention of the triplets' father, respecting Sarah's request to focus on the future, not the past. What Sarah didn't know was that the magazine would find its way to Jonathan Winthrop's desk. In his corner office at Winthrop Pharmaceuticals, Jonathan froze when he saw the familiar face staring back at him from the magazine his assistant had included in his daily media briefing. The byline caught his attention immediately. Dr. Sarah Chen, the next great medical innovator. With growing disbelief, he read about the woman he had dismissed so cruelly 5 years earlier. The article detailed her groundbreaking work in tissue preparation, her growing company, and the hospitals implementing her protocol. There was a brief mention of her as a single mother to 10-year-old triplet daughters, accompanied by a photo of 4 nearly identical faces smiling at the camera. Jonathan stared at the image, recognition dawning. The girls had his chin, the distinctive Winthrop chin that had marked family members for generations. They had Sarah's eyes, but there was no mistaking his own features in their faces. For the first time in 5 years, Jonathan Winthrop III thought about the night he had ordered Sarah out of his life, offering her money to solve the problem. The realization of what he had discarded hit him with unexpected force. He opened his browser and searched for Dr. Sarah Chen cardiac innovation. Pages of results appeared, medical journal articles, press releases from hospitals, a TEDx talk on reimagining transplantation. Sarah wasn't just successful, she was becoming a recognized leader in her field. Jonathan picked up his phone. Janet, find out everything you can about Chen Medical Innovations and its founder, Dr. Sarah Chen. Meanwhile, across the country, Sarah was expanding her operations. The company had moved to a larger facility with proper laboratories and 25 employees. She had completed her PhD, attending her graduation ceremony with the triplets and Auntie May cheering from the audience. Dr. Chen, the European delegation is here to discuss implementing your protocol across their hospital network, her executive assistant announced one morning. Sarah welcomed the representatives from the European Transplantation Consortium, now completely comfortable in her role as CEO and scientific innovator. As they discussed logistics for a continent-wide implementation, Sarah couldn't help but reflect on how far she had come from the devastated young woman who had once been told she would never be anything but a burden. That weekend, the Chen family attended a gala benefiting pediatric heart research. Sarah, elegant in a simple black dress, watched with pride as her daughters charmed donors with their knowledge and poise. "Your daughters are remarkable," commented the hospital's chief of surgery, "so articulate and intelligent for their age." "They've grown up in laboratories and medical conferences," Sarah replied with a smile. "They absorb everything." Across the ballroom, a familiar figure caught her attention: Richard Tanner, the Winthrop executive who had dismissed her proposal 5 years earlier. He was staring at her with undisguised surprise. Sarah nodded politely in his direction before turning back to her conversation. She no longer needed validation from Winthrop Pharmaceuticals or anyone associated with Jonathan. What Sarah didn't notice was Tanner taking out his phone and discreetly photographing her and the triplets before sending a text. 2 weeks later, at a medical innovation conference in New York, Sarah presented her latest research to a packed auditorium. As she concluded to enthusiastic applause, she noticed a tall figure standing at the back of the room, partially hidden in shadow. Jonathan Winthrop III watched the woman he had once dismissed command the respect of the entire medical community. His eyes shifted to the front row, where 3 identical girls sat watching their mother with obvious pride. His daughters, 3 brilliant, beautiful girls he had never known. As the crowd began to disperse, Jonathan slipped out a side door, unseen by Sarah or the triplets. He wasn't ready for a confrontation, not yet, but for the first time, he felt the full weight of what his cruelty had cost him. While observing Sarah and the 3 girls who were undeniably his daughters, Jonathan couldn't foresee that in just 5 years, he would stand before them in a public confrontation that would destroy his carefully constructed reputation. Jonathan's dark silhouette disappeared through the side door of the conference hall before Sarah could fully register his presence. She blinked, momentarily distracted from the crowd of admirers surrounding her after her presentation. Had that been him? After 5 years? The thought dissipated as quickly as it had formed when Olivia tugged at her sleeve, pulling her back to the present moment. 2 years later, Sarah stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of the Chen Cardiovascular Systems headquarters in downtown Manhattan, gazing at the skyline that had once intimidated her. Now, at 34, she owned a piece of it. The sleek 40-story building housed 500 employees across 15 floors dedicated to revolutionizing cardiovascular medicine. "Dr. Chen, the Tokyo team is ready for the video conference," her executive assistant announced, tablet in hand. Sarah nodded, smoothing her tailored Armani suit, purchased new, not second-hand, and made her way to the conference room where her 12-year-old triplets were already seated, prepared to translate complex medical terminology into flawless Japanese. "Konnichiwa," Olivia began confidently as the screens flickered to life, showing the serious faces of Japan's top cardiac surgeons. Emma and Sophia flanked their mother, notepads ready. The meeting proceeded seamlessly, with Sarah outlining the implementation plan for her cardiac assistance device in Tokyo's premier hospitals. When technical questions arose, the triplets translated medical jargon with precision that left the Japanese doctors visibly impressed. "Your daughters speak Japanese like natives," commented Dr. Tanaka, the lead surgeon, as the meeting concluded. "And their understanding of cardiac terminology is remarkable." Sarah smiled, pride evident in her eyes. "They've been studying since they were 6. They speak Mandarin, Japanese, French, and are currently learning Russian." What she didn't add was that the language skills were her daughter's idea, part of their self-designed education to become global citizens who help people, as Sophia had put it at age 7. After the meeting, Sarah took the private elevator to the research floor where her newest innovation was being tested, a revolutionary miniaturized cardiac assistance device that could be implanted with minimally invasive surgery. The prototype had been Sophia's design, refined by Sarah's team of engineers. Dr. Chen, the latest animal trials show 98% effectiveness, reported her research director. We're ready to submit to the FDA for human trials approval. Sarah nodded, studying the data carefully. Schedule a meeting with the legal team to prepare the submission. I want this moving forward as quickly as possible. Later that afternoon, as Sarah reviewed quarterly reports in her office, a news alert appeared on her screen. Winthrop Pharmaceuticals stock falls, 12% after failed drug trial. Curious despite herself, Sarah clicked on the article. Winthrop's much-hyped heart medication had failed to show significant benefits in Phase 3 trials. The company had invested heavily in the drug, positioning it as their next blockbuster. The article included a photo of Jonathan looking haggard as he left the company headquarters, reporters shouting questions he refused to answer. A knock at her door interrupted her thoughts. "Come in," she called, closing the browser tab. 12-year-old Emma entered carrying a scientific journal. "Mom, I found a methodological error in this research paper about neural responses to cardiac stress. Should I write to the author or the journal editor?" Sarah smiled, continuously amazed by her daughter's intellectual development. "Write to both, but be diplomatic. Remember, the goal is to advance knowledge, not embarrass colleagues." Emma nodded seriously. "That's what I thought. I've drafted both letters for you to review." As Emma left, Sarah's phone rang with a call from her foundation director. The Chen Heart Foundation, established 3 years earlier, funded cardiac care for underserved communities globally. Tomorrow, Sarah and the triplets would fly to Haiti to oversee the opening of a pediatric cardiac care center funded entirely by her foundation. "Everything's set for tomorrow's trip," her director confirmed. "The surgical team arrived this morning and the first procedures are scheduled for the day after your arrival." In the boardroom of Winthrop Pharmaceuticals, the atmosphere was tense. Jonathan sat at the head of the table, tie loosened, dark circles under his eyes as he faced the displeased board members. "This is the third failed trial this year," said an elderly board member, his voice sharp with disappointment. "We're losing market share to more innovative companies. Chen Cardiovascular Systems has particularly eaten into our cardiac division revenue." Jonathan winced at the mention of Chen. He had been following Sarah's meteoric rise with a mixture of disbelief and reluctant admiration. The company she had built from nothing now threatened Winthrop's dominance in several key markets. "We need to consider acquisitions," he admitted. "Our internal R&D hasn't produced results quickly enough." Later, alone in his office, Jonathan stared at his computer screen, which displayed Sarah's company profile. Chen Cardiovascular Systems had revolutionized cardiac care with innovations that seemed blindingly obvious in retrospect, but had somehow eluded Winthrop's extensive research teams. After a moment's hesitation, he drafted an email. "Dr. Chen, I hope this message finds you well. Winthrop Pharmaceuticals would like to discuss potential synergies between our organizations. Perhaps we could arrange a meeting at your convenience? Best regards, Jonathan Winthrop III, CEO, Winthrop Pharmaceuticals." His finger hovered over the send button for a full minute before he finally pressed it. The response came faster than he expected, just 20 minutes later. "Mr. Winthrop, thank you for your interest in Chen Cardiovascular Systems. We appreciate your outreach but do not see strategic alignment between our organizations at this time. We wish Winthrop Pharmaceuticals continued success in its endeavors. Regards, Dr. Sarah Chen, MD, PhD, founder and CEO, Chen Cardiovascular Systems." The polite but firm rejection stung more than Jonathan had anticipated. He closed his laptop with more force than necessary, pouring himself a generous scotch from the bar cabinet. Meanwhile, in Port-au-Prince, Sarah moved through the newly established cardiac center, inspecting equipment and consulting with local physicians. The triplets worked alongside her, each contributing in her own way. Olivia helped organize the legal documentation for patient care, Emma analyzed preliminary patient data, and Sophia assisted technicians in calibrating delicate equipment. "Dr. Chen, we can't thank you enough," said the Haitian health minister, emotion evident in his voice. Before this center, families had to send their children abroad for cardiac care, if they could afford it. Most couldn't. "Every child deserves the chance at a healthy heart," Sarah replied, watching as her daughters interacted with local children, speaking to them in fluent French, regardless of where they're born or their family's resources. That evening, as Sarah sat on the balcony of their hotel, the triplets joined her, their expressions thoughtful after their first day at the clinic. "Mom, why do some people have so much while others have so little?" Sophia asked, her sensitive nature always attuned to inequality. "The world isn't fair," Sarah answered honestly, "but that doesn't mean we can't work to make it more equitable." "Like you did for us," Emma observed. "You had nothing when we were born, but you made sure we had everything we needed." Sarah hugged her daughters close. "We had each other. That was always enough." What Sarah didn't mention was how close they had come to having nothing at all, how a single cruel decision by Jonathan could have ended their story before it began. Some truths were still too painful to share, even with her remarkable daughters. 2 days later, Sarah's phone buzzed with a notification from her media director. "Dr. Chen, Forbes wants to feature you in their next issue. The proposed headline is, 'The Billionaire Who Revolutionized Cardiac Care.' They're estimating your net worth at $1.2 billion. Should I schedule the interview?" Sarah stared at the message in disbelief. Billionaire? She had known the company was valuable. The last investment round had placed its worth at just under $4 billion, but she hadn't fully processed what that meant for her personally as the majority shareholder. "We'll need to postpone," she typed back. "We're in Haiti until next week, and this clinic launch takes priority." That evening, as local children crowded around the triplets who were teaching them how to use tablets loaded with educational games, a photographer from Forbes captured the moment, Sarah in the background, deep in conversation with a surgeon, while her daughters spread joy with effortless grace. The image would later become the cover of Forbes, with the headline, "The Billionaire Who Said No to Winthrop: How Dr. Sarah Chen Built a Cardiac Care Empire While Changing Global Health." In his Manhattan penthouse, not the same one where he had once cruelly dismissed Sarah, but a newer, even more opulent space, Jonathan flipped through the latest Forbes issue, his expression darkening as he read the feature on Sarah Chen. The article detailed her journey from struggling medical student to billionaire CEO, praising her innovations and philanthropic work. A section particularly caught his attention. When asked about competitors and potential acquisition offers, Dr. Chen is firm. "Chen Cardiovascular Systems is not for sale at any price. Our mission is patient-centered, not profit-centered. While we're commercially successful, that success fuels our ability to serve underserved populations. That balance would be lost in an acquisition." The article made no mention of Jonathan or the triplets' paternity, but it did include a striking photo of Sarah with her 12-year-old daughters in Haiti, their identical faces alight with purpose and joy. Jonathan studied the image, the resemblance to himself undeniable. 3 brilliant young women he had never known, would never know. His fingers traced their faces on the glossy page, a hollow feeling expanding in his chest. His phone rang, interrupting his thoughts. It was his assistant. "Sir, the board is requesting an emergency meeting tomorrow morning. They've seen the Forbes article on Chen Cardiovascular. Several members are suggesting we make a formal acquisition offer, regardless of Dr. Chen's stated position." Jonathan agreed to the meeting and hung up, still staring at the magazine. An acquisition would bring him face to face with Sarah again, and possibly the daughters he had rejected before they were even born. Was he ready for that confrontation? Did he even have a choice, given the board's pressure? As Sarah worked tirelessly in the Haitian clinic, saving children with the technology she had developed from nothing, she remained completely unaware that her next great innovation, the regenerative cardiac tissue technology she had been developing in secret for 3 years, would not only be her greatest scientific achievement but would also catalyze the confrontation that would forever change her relationship with the past. Sarah watched from the laboratory window as an early morning thunderstorm swept across Manhattan, the rain lashing against the glass like nature's applause for what her team had just accomplished. In the sterile environment behind her, cardiac tissue was regenerating in a specialized chamber, not merely being preserved or protected, but actually growing new cells. After 3 years of secretive development, the breakthrough that would transform cardiac medicine forever had finally happened. "It's working," whispered Dr. Amit Sharma, her lead researcher, his voice trembling with excitement. "The myocardial tissue is actually regenerating at a cellular level." Sarah nodded, her calm exterior masking the exhilaration churning within. At 37, she had built Chen Cardiovascular Systems into a global enterprise with 2,000 employees across 4 continents. Her cardiac tissue preparation protocol had saved thousands of lives and made her a billionaire. But this was different. This wasn't just improving existing treatments. This was rewriting what was possible. "Let's run the verification protocols again," she said, ever the meticulous scientist. "I want absolute certainty before we document this." As the research team bustled around her, Sarah's phone vibrated with a calendar alert. "Girls, Science Competition Finals, 4 p.m. Despite the historic moment unfolding in her laboratory, Sarah never missed her daughter's important events. Now, 14, the triplets had blossomed into brilliant young women, each with distinct passions that were already garnering attention beyond their years. 6 hours later, Sarah sat in the auditorium of New York's prestigious Bronx High School of Science, watching Emma present her research on neural responses to cardiac stimulation. At 14, Emma spoke with the confidence and precision of a seasoned researcher, fielding questions from the panel of scientists with remarkable ease. The correlation between neural plasticity and cardiac rhythm adaptation suggests potential new pathways for treating arrhythmias, Emma concluded, her poised demeanor a mirror image of her mother's professional presence. In the audience, Olivia and Sophia beamed with pride, each having already presented their own projects. Olivia's on the legal and ethical frameworks of organ donation across international boundaries, and Sophia's on a self-designed bioengineering solution for minimally invasive heart valve replacement. After the ceremony, where all 3 girls received top honors in their categories, Sarah embraced them with fierce pride. "You were all extraordinary," she said, meaning every word. "Your insights on neural plasticity were particularly impressive, Emma." "I incorporated some concepts from your regenerative tissue research," Emma replied, adjusting her glasses in a gesture reminiscent of Sarah, "though I was careful not to reveal any proprietary information." Sarah raised an eyebrow. "My research is classified. How did you—" "Your home office password is still too predictable, Mom," Emma said with a small smile. "And your research notes are fascinating." Instead of being upset, Sarah felt a surge of pride at her daughter's initiative and intelligence. These were Jonathan Winthrop's daughters, too, the children he had dismissed as burdens before they were even born. Yet here they stood, already contributing to scientific advancement before they could even drive. Back at their penthouse apartment overlooking Central Park, a far cry from Auntie May's cramped Queens apartment where they had spent their early years, Sarah gathered the girls for a family meeting. Auntie May, now in her 80s but still sharp-minded, sat with them, her weathered hands folded in her lap. "I have something important to share with you," Sarah began. "The regenerative cardiac tissue technology we've been developing has reached a critical milestone. It works. Actually works." The triplets exchanged excited glances, immediately grasping the significance. "Cellular-level regeneration?" Sophia asked, her eyes wide. "Complete functional integration?" added Emma. "What about the patent applications?" Olivia inquired practically. Sarah smiled at their rapid-fire questions. Yes, and already filed under multiple jurisdictions. But there's more. The FDA has fast-tracked our application for preliminary human trials. This will change everything, Sophia whispered, understanding the implications for patients worldwide. And the Winthrop acquisition bid? Olivia asked, surprising Sarah. How did you know about that? Olivia shrugged. I monitor industry news. Winthrop Pharmaceuticals stock has been declining for 3 consecutive quarters. They need an innovation breakthrough, and we're the obvious target. Sarah sometimes forgot how remarkably informed her daughters were about her business. Yes, they've made overtures through intermediaries, and as always, my answer is no. What Sarah didn't share was that Jonathan himself had recently sent a personal email, bypassing corporate channels. Sarah, business considerations aside, I've been following your work with admiration. Perhaps we could meet informally to discuss potential collaborations that would benefit patients on both sides. Jonathan. She had deleted it without responding. The next morning, Sarah sat in the boardroom of Chen Cardiovascular's headquarters, surrounded by her international research team. On large screens around the room, scientists from laboratories in Tokyo, Berlin, Tel Aviv, and Boston reported their findings from parallel experiments. The results are consistent across all testing sites, confirmed Dr. Erika Schmidt from the Berlin facility. The regeneration protocol works regardless of donor tissue type or recipient profile. The Israeli team has successfully replicated the results in larger mammalian models, added Dr. Levi from Tel Aviv. Regeneration is consistent and predictable. Sarah absorbed the reports with focused attention, occasionally asking piercing questions that demonstrated her complete command of the science despite her executive role. This technology wasn't just an incremental improvement, it would fundamentally change cardiac care. For some patients, it could eliminate the need for transplants entirely. Meanwhile, in the Winthrop Pharmaceuticals boardroom, the atmosphere was grim. Jonathan sat at the head of the table, his expression tense as the quarterly results were presented. Our cardiovascular division has lost 28% market share in the past 18 months, reported the CFO. Most of it to Chen Cardiovascular and other more innovative competitors. What's the status of our acquisition approach to Chen? Asked an elderly board member, his tone sharp with impatience. Jonathan shifted uncomfortably. Dr. Chen has consistently rebuffed all approaches, both formal and informal. Then increase the offer, snapped another board member. Everyone has a price. Not Sarah Chen, Jonathan replied before he could stop himself, earning curious looks from several board members. After the meeting, Richard Tanner, now Jonathan's second-in-command, lingered in the boardroom. You know her personally, don't you? He asked quietly. Chen, there's history there. Jonathan's jaw tightened. Ancient history. Nothing in business is ancient, Tanner replied smoothly, especially when it affects current negotiations. What's the connection? After a long pause, Jonathan admitted, We were involved briefly during medical school. It ended poorly. How poorly? Tanner pressed. Jonathan didn't answer, but his expression said enough. I see, Tanner said thoughtfully. Perhaps we need a different approach then. Our sources say Chen is working on something revolutionary, regenerative cardiac tissue. If we can't buy them, maybe we should explore other options. What are you suggesting? Jonathan asked warily. Nothing illegal, Tanner assured him with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Just creative, competitive intelligence. 3 months later, Sarah stood before an international audience at a medical conference in Geneva, presenting the first public overview of her regenerative cardiac tissue technology. The auditorium was packed with the world's leading cardiologists and researchers, many recording her presentation on their phones despite the no recording policy. What we've achieved is not just tissue preservation or protection, Sarah explained, displaying slides of the regeneration process. This is actual cellular regeneration and integration. For patients with damaged heart tissue from infarction or disease, this offers the possibility of regenerating their own cardiac tissue rather than replacing it. The implications were staggering, and the audience knew it. Questions flew from all directions, which Sarah handled with practiced ease, careful not to reveal proprietary details while sharing enough to establish Chen Cardiovascular's clear leadership in the field. That evening, at a reception overlooking Lake Geneva, Sarah was surrounded by admirers and potential partners when she felt a familiar presence. Turning slightly, she saw Jonathan standing across the room, watching her with an unreadable expression. Their eyes met briefly before Sarah deliberately turned back to her conversation, giving no indication that she had recognized him. Later, as Sarah was leaving, Jonathan approached her directly for the first time in 15 years. "Sarah," he said simply, his voice carrying a complex mixture of emotions. She turned, her expression professional and distant. "Mr. Winthrop, I understand Winthrop Pharmaceuticals has been interested in our technology." Jonathan flinched slightly at her formality. "This isn't about business. I've been hoping to speak with you personally." "I don't see what we have to discuss on a personal level," Sarah replied coolly. "If you have business inquiries, our corporate development team is the appropriate channel." Before Jonathan could respond, 3 identical young women appeared at Sarah's side. The triplets, now 14 and strikingly beautiful, each bearing the unmistakable Winthrop chin alongside Sarah's intelligent eyes. "Mom, the German research minister wants to meet you before we leave," said Olivia, glancing curiously at Jonathan. Jonathan stared at the girls, unable to mask his shock at seeing them up close for the first time. The photographs he had seen didn't capture their presence, their obvious intelligence, or the confident way they carried themselves. "Who's this?" Emma asked, her analytical gaze assessing Jonathan with unsettling precision. "Jonathan Winthrop, CEO of Winthrop Pharmaceuticals," Sarah replied neutrally. "Mr. Winthrop, these are my daughters." Jonathan struggled to find words, overwhelmed by the reality of seeing his daughters, the children he had rejected before birth, standing before him as poised young women. "It's nice to meet you," he managed finally. The triplets responded with polite but distant acknowledgments, clearly taking their cue from their mother's formal tone. "We should go, Mom," Sophia said, sensing the tension. "The flight to Tokyo leaves early tomorrow." With a brief nod to Jonathan, Sarah left with her daughters, her posture straight and proud. Jonathan watched them go, the full weight of what he had discarded 15 years ago crashing down on him with devastating clarity. 2 months after the Geneva conference, the regenerative cardiac tissue technology received its formal name, the Chen Protocol for Cardiac Regeneration. Preliminary human trials were underway at 5 major medical centers worldwide, with results exceeding even Sarah's optimistic projections. The cover of Time magazine featured Sarah in a lab coat, surrounded by illuminated cardiac tissue samples, with the headline, "The Woman Who is Reinventing the Human Heart." The accompanying article detailed not only her scientific breakthrough but her journey from struggling single mother to global healthcare innovator. Sarah kept the magazine away from the house, uncomfortable with the personal attention, but the triplets found it anyway, poring over the article with pride and curiosity. "Do you think he'll see this?" Sophia asked quietly one evening, surprising Sarah with the question. "Who?" Sarah asked, though she knew exactly whom her daughter meant. "Our father," Sophia said simply. "The Time cover is everywhere." Sarah set down her tablet, giving her full attention to her daughters. "He might. Does that matter to you?" The girls exchanged glances, having clearly discussed this among themselves. "We're curious about him," Emma admitted. "Not because we need him, but because we want to understand that part of our genetics." "From a purely scientific perspective," she added, though her expression suggested more complex emotions. Sarah nodded slowly. "That's understandable. And someday, when you're ready, I'll tell you everything. But know this, you 3 are extraordinary not because of your genetics, but because of your choices, your hard work, and your hearts." While observing her daughters discussing the Time cover, Sarah couldn't know that within a few months, she would be face-to-face with Jonathan Winthrop on a stage in Boston, in a confrontation that would reveal truths kept hidden for 15 years. The morning light streamed through the expansive windows of Sarah's Manhattan penthouse, illuminating the meticulous notes spread across her desk. For weeks, she had been refining her presentation for the annual Cardiovascular Innovation Conference in Boston, the perfect platform to announce the FDA's formal approval of her regenerative cardiac tissue technology. This would be the culmination of 15 years of work, the transformation of that initial $50,000 into a revolution that would save millions of lives. Sarah rubbed her eyes, the fatigue of preparation weighing on her despite her excitement. The soft ping of her phone drew her attention to a text from Dr. Maxwell Goldstein, the Boston surgeon who had first taken a chance on her methodology years ago. The medical community is buzzing about your presentation. Word is every major pharma CEO will be there, including Winthrop. Just thought you should know. Sarah's fingers hovered over the screen. Jonathan. After their brief encounter in Geneva 6 months ago, she had deliberately avoided any events where he might be present. The thought of seeing him again, especially with the triplets in attendance, sent an uncomfortable ripple through her usually calm demeanor. "Mom, can I borrow your navy blazer for the conference? Mine has that coffee stain I can't get out." Olivia's voice broke through Sarah's thoughts as she appeared in the doorway, already dressed in tailored slacks and a crisp white shirt. "Of course," Sarah replied, quickly setting her phone aside. "Are your sisters ready for the trip?" Emma's triple-checking her presentation notes, and Sophia's still deliberating between two identical-looking pairs of shoes. Olivia rolled her eyes affectionately. "But we'll be packed on schedule." Sarah smiled, her momentary discomfort fading. The girls had insisted on accompanying her to Boston, eager to witness what the medical community was already calling a historic announcement. "This isn't just your moment, Mom," Emma had argued when Sarah suggested they might find the conference boring. "This technology will change medicine forever. We've watched you build it from nothing. We deserve to see the world recognize what we've always known." Now, as Sarah packed her own suitcase, she found herself rehearsing not just her presentation but potential scenarios if she encountered Jonathan. Would he approach her again? What would she say to him after all these years? How would she protect the girls from the truth that their father had once offered money to solve the problem they represented? Across town, in the sleek corner office of Winthrop Pharmaceuticals, Jonathan stared at the conference agenda on his desk. Sarah's name was listed as the keynote speaker, her presentation titled simply, "The Future of Cardiac Regeneration." The board had been explicit. He needed to attend personally to assess whether Winthrop should make another acquisition attempt or pivot their research to compete directly. The Chen cardiovascular presentation materials arrived, his assistant announced, placing a folder on his desk. Highly redacted, of course, but the overview is there. Jonathan nodded absently, opening the folder to find Sarah's professional headshot staring back at him. At 39, she was more beautiful than ever, her features refined by time and success. There was a confidence in her eyes that hadn't been there 15 years ago, a certainty that he had tried to crush but had instead forged into something unbreakable. His eyes lingered on the biography paragraph, noting her numerous achievements. Harvard Medical School professor, 8 patents, 2 honorary doctorates, founder of a billion-dollar company. Every accolade seemed to mock his cruel dismissal years ago. "You'll never be anything but a burden." With a sigh, Jonathan opened his laptop and booked a suite at the Grand Hyatt Boston, the conference venue. A moment's hesitation, then he reserved a second room. Maybe, just maybe, there might be an opportunity to speak with the triplets, to explain, to attempt some form of amends. The thought sent a wave of anxiety through him. What could he possibly say to the daughters he had rejected before they took their first breath? 3 days later, Sarah's private jet touched down at Boston Logan International Airport. As their car approached the Grand Hyatt, Sophia pressed her face against the window, taking in the historic architecture of Boston. I've compiled a list of cardiac surgeons attending who've implemented your protocol, Emma announced, scrolling through her tablet. 37 in total, representing 22 countries. And I've prepared a summary of the intellectual property implications of the FDA approval, added Olivia. The patent protection is comprehensive across all potential applications. Sarah smiled at her daughters, marveling as always at their brilliance and composure. Thank you both. And Sophia, what have you prepared? Sophia looked up from her sketchbook where she'd been designing what appeared to be a miniaturized version of the regeneration chamber. I've been thinking about portable applications. If we could reduce the size by 60% without compromising efficacy. The car pulled up to the hotel entrance, where conference staff immediately recognized Sarah and rushed forward to assist with their luggage. The executive director of the conference herself came to greet them in the lobby. Dr. Chen, we're honored to have you as our keynote speaker, she gushed. Your suite is ready, and we've arranged for the private rehearsal time you requested in the main auditorium. As they crossed the opulent lobby, Sarah felt a prickle at the back of her neck, the uncomfortable sensation of being watched. Glancing toward the bar area, she caught a glimpse of a familiar profile before it disappeared behind a newspaper. Jonathan was already here, already watching. Is everything okay, Mom? Sophia asked, always the most sensitive to emotional undercurrents. Everything's fine, Sarah assured her, guiding her daughters toward the elevators. Just a bit tired from the flight. In their suite, as the girls unpacked and argued good-naturedly about who would take which bedroom, Sarah stood at the window overlooking Boston Harbor, collecting her thoughts. Tomorrow would be professionally momentous, but she couldn't shake the feeling that it might be personally momentous as well. That evening, Sarah took the triplets to dinner at an exclusive restaurant overlooking the harbor. The maitre d' ushered them to the best table, murmuring discreetly to Sarah that several diners had recognized her from the Time cover. Does it bother you? Emma asked, noticing her mother's slight discomfort with the attention. Being recognized everywhere? Sarah considered the question. Not bothered exactly, just aware that people are watching, forming opinions, making judgments. It creates a certain pressure to always be perfect, suggested Olivia. Presentable, Sarah corrected with a small smile. There's no such thing as perfect. Accept your regenerative tissue protocol, Emma quipped. 99.7% efficacy in clinical trials is statistically as close to perfect as medical science gets. As they enjoyed their meal, Sarah didn't notice Jonathan entering the restaurant, freezing momentarily when he spotted her with the triplets, then requesting a table on the opposite side where he could observe them without being easily seen. Throughout dinner, he watched the easy interaction between Sarah and their daughters, the obvious bond between them, the way they alternated between sophisticated scientific discussion and typical teenage banter. He had missed everything, their first words, first steps, first day of school. He had missed the chance to know these extraordinary young women who were clearly brilliant reflections of their mother, with unmistakable echoes of himself. The next morning, Sarah arrived early at the conference auditorium for her final rehearsal. The triplets insisted on accompanying her, each offering constructive feedback on her presentation. The transition between slides 14 and 15 needs a clearer verbal bridge, suggested Emma, ever the perfectionist. You should pause longer after mentioning the mortality reduction statistics, advised Olivia. Let the impact sink in. And smile more at the beginning, added Sophia. You look too serious when you're nervous. Sarah laughed, grateful for their support. When did you three become presentation experts? We've been watching you since we were babies, Olivia replied simply. We know what works. As they exited the auditorium, they nearly collided with a man entering through the side door. Sarah's breath caught as she found herself face to face with Jonathan, closer than they had been in 15 years except for their brief Geneva encounter. He looked older, more lined around the eyes, his once arrogant posture now carrying a hint of weariness. Yet the expensive suit, the Patek Philippe watch, the perfectly groomed appearance, All spoke of the privilege that had always defined him. "Sarah," he said softly, his eyes moving from her to the triplets with barely concealed emotion. "I was hoping to catch you before the crowds arrived." Sarah instinctively stepped slightly in front of her daughters, a protective gesture not lost on anyone present. "Mr. Winthrop, I wasn't aware you had an interest in regenerative medicine." Her cool professionalism clearly stung him. "I have an interest in groundbreaking innovations," he replied, then added more quietly, "and in making amends where possible." The triplets exchanged glances, their identical expressions reflecting confusion and curiosity. They had never heard their mother mention this man by name, yet the tension between them was palpable. "Mom?" Olivia questioned, her sharp mind already connecting dots. "We should go," Sarah said firmly. "I need to change before the presentation." Jonathan's eyes lingered on the girls, drinking in details he had no right to know. The way Emma adjusted her glasses just as he did when thinking, how Olivia stood with his characteristic posture, how Sophia's expressions mirrored his sister's. "They're remarkable," he said softly. "You must be very proud." "I am," Sarah replied, her voice softening slightly despite herself. "Excuse us." As they walked away, Sophia glanced back once, her intuitive nature sensing something significant in the exchange. Back in their suite, the questions began immediately. "Who was that man, Mom?" Olivia demanded. "You clearly know him beyond professional circles." Sarah took a deep breath, buying time by smoothing her presentation outfit on the bed. "He's someone I knew many years ago. It's complicated." "Complicated how?" pressed Emma, her analytical mind already assembling the available evidence. "He looked at us strangely, and he has our chin." Sarah sighed. Her brilliant daughters were too perceptive to be put off with vague explanations. "You're right. That's a conversation we should have, but not right now, not minutes before the most important presentation of my career. I promise we'll talk after." The girls reluctantly agreed, but their curious glances told Sarah that the moment of truth she had been postponing for 15 years was finally upon her. 2 hours later, Sarah stood backstage at the packed auditorium, the soft hum of 2,000 attendees creating a background buzz of anticipation. Through a gap in the curtains, she could see the triplets seated in the front row, their expressions a mixture of excitement and lingering questions. Scanning the audience, she spotted Jonathan in the third row, his attention fixed on the stage, unaware that in less than 24 hours he would be looking into the eyes of the woman he abandoned, now standing before 2,000 witnesses with the balance of power completely reversed. The soft hum of anticipation filled the Grand Hyatt Auditorium as the conference coordinator approached the podium. Sarah took one final deep breath backstage, adjusting her impeccable white blazer, Armani, not the second-hand garments she once wore to interviews. The weight of the moment settled upon her shoulders, not as a burden, but as a crown. 15 years of work, sacrifice, and determination had led to this moment. "Ladies and gentlemen," the coordinator's voice resonated through the hall. "It is my immense pleasure to introduce our keynote speaker, a true revolutionary in the field of cardiovascular medicine, graduated with honors from Harvard, earned her PhD in bioengineering from MIT, holder of 8 patents that have transformed cardiac treatment, and founder of Chen Cardiovascular Systems, recently valued at $8.9 billion. Please welcome Dr. Sarah Chen." The applause was thunderous as Sarah walked confidently to center stage, her posture reflecting the quiet dignity she had cultivated through years of proving herself in rooms full of doubters. In the front row, her 3 daughters beamed with pride, each wearing matching navy dresses with silver pins on their lapels, medals from the scientific competitions they had dominated throughout the year. Jonathan Winthrop III, who had been checking emails on his phone during the introduction, looked up at the mention of the name. His expression shifted from distracted to disbelieving as he watched Sarah take command of the stage. He blinked repeatedly, trying to reconcile the poised, elegant CEO before him with the frightened student he had cruelly dismissed 15 years ago. "Thank you for that generous introduction," Sarah began, her voice steady and clear. "Today, I'm honored to share with you the culmination of work that began in the most unlikely circumstances." As Sarah launched into her presentation, displaying complex graphs and compelling case studies, she captivated the audience with both scientific precision and passionate conviction. The data was irrefutable. Her regenerative cardiac tissue technology showed success rates that were previously considered impossible. "What we've developed isn't merely an improvement on existing treatments," she explained, gesturing toward a dramatic visualization of cardiac tissue regeneration. "This represents a fundamental shift in how we approach heart damage. Instead of replacing tissue, we're enabling the heart to heal itself." Jonathan stared transfixed, his gaze alternating between Sarah and the three identical young women in the front row. The girls were taking notes, occasionally exchanging whispers, clearly understanding every complex concept their mother presented. With each passing minute, the reality crashed harder upon him. These weren't just Sarah's children, they were his daughters. Three brilliant young women with his unmistakable Winthrop chin and eyes that reminded him of his own mother. Sarah continued her presentation with methodical brilliance, unaware of Jonathan's internal turmoil. It was during her explanation of the technology's cellular integration process that her eyes finally met his in the audience. For a fraction of a second, so brief that only someone watching closely would notice, she faltered, a microscopic hesitation in her otherwise flawless delivery. The moment passed, and Sarah continued seamlessly, but something had shifted in the atmosphere between them. Recognition had occurred, acknowledgement of a shared past that only they understood. "The implications for pediatric cardiac patients are particularly significant," Sarah said, her voice gaining strength as she progressed. "Children who would previously require multiple transplants throughout their lives may now undergo a single regenerative procedure with lasting results." Jonathan felt the words like physical blows. Children, lives. The daughters he had rejected were sitting meters away from him, living testament to what he had discarded as a problem to be solved with $50,000. As Sarah's presentation reached its climax, she revealed the news that would send shockwaves through the medical community and pharmaceutical industry alike. "I'm pleased to announce that this morning the FDA granted full approval for the Chen Regenerative Cardiac Protocol," she stated, allowing a rare smile to illuminate her face. "Effective immediately, this technology will be available to cardiac patients across the United States, with global implementation to follow in the coming months." The audience erupted in applause, many rising to their feet in recognition of the historic announcement. In the front row, the triplets stood first, their faces glowing with pride as they applauded their mother's achievement. Jonathan remained seated, physically unable to rise as the implications washed over him. Not only had Sarah succeeded beyond anyone's imagination, but she had done so while raising three exceptional daughters, alone. The very scenario he had deemed impossible when he callously dismissed her had become her triumph. When the thunderous ovation finally subsided, Sarah concluded with characteristic grace. "Thank you for your attention. I look forward to working with many of you as we implement this technology to benefit patients worldwide." As Sarah left the stage, the audience immediately began buzzing with excitement. Medical professionals turned to colleagues, investors checked stock prices on their phones, and journalists frantically typed notes. The energy in the room was electric. Everyone understood they had witnessed a watershed moment in medical history. The reception that followed was held in the hotel's grand ballroom, transformed into an elegant showcase for Chen cardiovascular systems. Display screens showed animations of the regenerative process, while research team members answered technical questions from interested physicians. Sarah was immediately surrounded by admirers, potential investors, and medical directors from leading hospitals. Jonathan observed from a distance, nursing a scotch as he gathered courage to approach her. When he finally managed to navigate through the crowd, He found her deep in conversation with the CEO of the Mayo Clinic. "Sarah?" he said, his voice betraying his uncertainty. "Jonathan Winthrop. I don't know if you remember me." The look Sarah gave him was politely vacant, as if trying to place a distant acquaintance. "Mr. Winthrop, of course. From Winthrop Pharmaceuticals, correct? I believe our legal teams have been in contact about that patent dispute." The calculated coolness in her voice was more devastating than any display of anger could have been. "I'd like to speak with you, privately," Jonathan said, uncomfortable with the curious glances from those nearby. "I'm afraid my schedule is completely booked today," Sarah replied, discreetly checking her platinum watch. "But my assistant can arrange a meeting in the coming weeks if it's about business matters." It was at that moment that the triplets approached, immediately drawing Jonathan's attention. Seeing them up close intensified the shock. The Winthrop DNA was undeniable in every feature of their faces. "Mom, Dr. Goldstein is asking if you can speak with him about implementing your protocol at Mount Sinai," said Emma, not noticing the tension in the air. "And the National Science Foundation team wants to confirm your participation in tomorrow's award ceremony," added Sophia. Olivia, the most perceptive of the three, noticed the stranger's intense gaze. "Excuse me, you are—" "He's the CEO of Winthrop Pharmaceuticals," Sarah intervened smoothly. "Mr. Winthrop, these are my daughters, Olivia, Emma, and Sophia." Jonathan swallowed hard, unable to disguise his emotion. "You are triplets." "Identical triplets," Emma corrected automatically. "It's a quite rare condition, occurring in approximately 0.01% of natural pregnancies." "And all of you are interested in medicine like your mother?" Jonathan asked desperately, trying to establish some connection. "Actually, we have diverse interests," replied Sophia politely. "I'm more focused on bioengineering, Emma on neuroscience, and Olivia is torn between cardiothoracic surgery and medical law." Jonathan felt the impact of each word. Not only had Sarah raised 3 daughters on her own, but they were clearly prodigies in their own right. Just then, a photographer from Forbes approached. "Dr. Chen, could we take some photos for the cover story? The editor is particularly interested in an image of you with your daughters, considering the headline will be, 'The Empire of Healing, How the Chen Dynasty is Redefining American Medicine.'" The irony of the word dynasty wasn't lost on Jonathan, who watched as Sarah and the girls posed naturally, clearly accustomed to media attention. "Dr. Chen," interrupted an executive in an impeccable suit, "the NIH representative has confirmed approval of the $4.8 billion contract. The documents are ready for your signature." Jonathan couldn't contain his astonishment. $4.8 billion from the National Institutes of Health? "For nationwide implementation of the Pediatric Cardiac Regeneration Program," confirmed Sarah with a slight smile. "A particularly important project for me." The full reality of the situation finally hit Jonathan with devastating force. The woman he had cast aside as a burden was about to sign a billion-dollar contract with the federal government, while his own company struggled to maintain relevance in the market. "Sarah, please," he implored, lowering his voice. "I need to talk to you. About the past. About them." The look Sarah directed at him contained 15 years of accumulated strength. "There's nothing to say, Mr. Winthrop. The past is exactly where it should be. In the past." At that moment, Olivia, who had been observing the interaction with growing suspicion, stepped forward. "Mom, who is this man really? Why is he so interested in us?" A tense silence settled over the small circle as more people drew closer, attracted by Sarah's magnetic presence and curious about the evident tension. "I am," Jonathan began, looking imploringly at Sarah. "He's someone I knew a long time ago," Sarah interrupted firmly. "And as I said, that belongs to the past." "It's him, isn't it?" Sophia suddenly asked, her intuition sharply capturing what remained unsaid. "He's the man who abandoned us before we were even born." The murmurs around them increased, with surprised faces and shocked expressions. Jonathan felt sweat running down his back, watching his world crumble in real time. When Mr. Winthrop tried to do me a favor by offering $50,000 to get rid of the problem, I invested in my first cardiovascular patent, which is now worth more than the entire Winthrop Pharmaceuticals, Sarah stated calmly, her voice containing no anger, only the tranquil strength of someone who had completely overcome the past. Jonathan staggered slightly, feeling the onset of a sharp pain in his chest. "Sarah, please, not like this, not here." But it was too late. The revelation had been made, and whispers spread through the room like wildfire. The man who had rejected Sarah Chen and her daughters for not being good enough for the Winthrop dynasty was now exposed before the medical and business elite of the country. The scene at the Grand Hyatt Boston had transformed from a professional medical conference into something far more personal and explosive. The murmurs spread through the crowd like ripples in still water, gathering force as they traveled. Jonathan's face had gone ashen, his normally commanding presence diminished as he clutched at his chest, loosening his tie with trembling fingers. "Someone get him a chair," a physician in the crowd called out, professional instincts overriding the collective shock at the unfolding drama. 2 hotel staff members quickly brought a chair, and Jonathan sank into it gratefully, his breathing labored. The crowd parted slightly, creating a small island of space around the disgraced pharmaceutical executive and the woman he had once cast aside. "Is he having a heart attack?" someone whispered loudly enough to be heard. "Panic attack, more likely," replied another voice. "Look at his breathing pattern." Olivia, with the directness that characterized her personality, turned to her mother. "Mom, we need to talk, now." Sarah nodded, her composure never wavering despite the chaos around her. "Girls, let's go somewhere private." As they turned to leave, Jonathan looked up, his eyes pleading. "Sarah, please." She paused, regarding him with a gaze that held neither hatred nor forgiveness, simply the clear-eyed assessment of someone who had moved beyond the need for either. "Take care of yourself, Jonathan. There are plenty of cardiologists here if you need assistance." The Chen women moved with quiet dignity through the parting crowd toward a private meeting room that had been reserved for Sarah's use during the conference. As they walked away, journalists discreetly captured the moment on their smartphones, and executives from competing pharmaceutical companies exchanged significant glances, already calculating how this revelation would affect Winthrop Pharmaceuticals' stock when markets opened the next morning. Inside the private room, Sarah closed the door and turned to face her daughters. The 3 14-year-old girls stood before her, their expressions ranging from Olivia's indignation to Emma's analytical detachment to Sophia's conflicted curiosity. "So it's him," Olivia stated flatly, not a question, but a confirmation. "The man who abandoned us." Sarah took a deep breath, settling into one of the plush chairs and gesturing for her daughters to join her. "Yes, that's Jonathan Winthrop III, your biological father. Why didn't you tell us it was him specifically when we asked about our father before?" Emma inquired, her logical mind seeking to fill gaps in information. "You always said he chose not to be part of our lives, but you never mentioned he was the CEO of a major pharmaceutical company." "I didn't want your understanding of yourselves to be shaped by his rejection," Sarah explained, her voice gentle but firm, "or by his name and position. I wanted you to become who you are without the shadow of the Winthrop legacy hanging over you, either as something to live up to or to rebel against." Sophia, always the most empathetic of the 3, asked quietly, "Did he really give you money to get rid of us?" Sarah reached out to take her daughter's hands, forming a circle of connection. "Yes. He transferred $50,000 to me and told me to solve the problem. That money became the seed funding for our first patent, though he certainly didn't intend it that way." "What a miscalculation," Emma observed with clinical precision. "Based on current valuation, that might be the worst investment decision in pharmaceutical history." Despite the gravity of the moment, Sarah couldn't help a small smile at her daughter's assessment. It wasn't about investment for him. It was about convenience and image. He made it very clear that someone with my background, an immigrant's daughter from Queens with no social connections, wasn't suitable to be connected to the Winthrop dynasty. "Yet here we are," Olivia said, straightening her shoulders in a gesture that uncannily mirrored Jonathan's own mannerism, "about to be featured in Forbes as the Chen dynasty." "Life has a certain poetry to it sometimes," Sarah acknowledged. A soft knock at the door interrupted their conversation. Sarah's executive assistant poked her head in. "Dr. Chen, I'm sorry to interrupt, but Mr. Winthrop is insisting on speaking with you. He seems quite distressed." Sarah looked to her daughters, giving them the power to decide. "This is about you three as much as it's about me. What do you want to do?" The girls exchanged glances, having one of those silent conversations that only identical triplets seemed capable of conducting. "We'll see him," Emma decided, speaking for all three. "Psychologically, it will be better to face this directly rather than allow it to become an unresolved emotional complex." "Together," added Sophia firmly. Sarah nodded, pride mixing with concern. "Send him in," she told her assistant, "but stay close by." When Jonathan entered the room moments later, he had regained some of his composure, though he still looked shaken. His expensive suit, normally immaculate, was slightly rumpled, and his carefully maintained facade of corporate confidence had cracked to reveal the vulnerability beneath. "Sarah," he began, then stopped, overwhelmed by the sight of all four women regarding him with identical expressions of calm assessment. "I don't know where to begin." "There's no script for this situation, Mr. Winthrop," Sarah replied evenly. "Say what you came to say." Jonathan ran a hand through his silver-streaked hair, a gesture of genuine distress. "I never knew. I didn't imagine." He gestured helplessly toward the triplets. "You are extraordinary." "That is not to your credit," Olivia stated bluntly. "I know," Jonathan admitted, surprising them with his directness. "That's entirely your mother's achievement, and that's why I need you to understand, to know, that I made the greatest mistake of my life that day." "Mr. Winthrop," Sarah interrupted, her voice calm but firm, "I'm not interested in your justifications or belated regrets. If you're concerned about your reputation after what happened here today, I can assure you I have no interest in publicly damaging you." "It's not that," he exclaimed, frustration breaking through. "It's not about my reputation. It's about them, about losing the chance to know my own daughters, to see the amazing woman you've become." "Correction," Emma interjected, her tone precise. "You didn't lose the chance. You actively chose to give up that chance when you rejected us before we were even born." "And now, what do you expect?" Sophia asked, her voice softer than her sister's but no less firm. "That we should simply accept you into our lives because you've decided we're up to Winthrop standards?" Jonathan visibly flinched at hearing his own cruel words from 15 years ago thrown back at him. "I have rights," he began weakly. "Rights?" Sarah laughed, a sound devoid of humor. "You abdicated any rights the moment you offered me $50,000 to solve the problem. Legally, you never acknowledged paternity, never paid child support, never showed any interest in 15 years. My attorneys confirmed this," Emma added. "We researched the legal situation when we turned 13, out of curiosity." Jonathan looked devastated. "Sarah, please, I'm not asking to be immediately accepted as a father. I'm just asking for a chance to know them, to try to make amends somehow." "Make amends?" echoed Sarah. "And how exactly would you compensate for the nights I spent working 3 jobs while pregnant? The times I had to choose between buying school books or paying rent? The years I postponed my dreams to ensure they had every opportunity?" She looked at her daughters with undisguised pride. "But you know what? I wouldn't change a thing, because everything we went through made us who we are today. And we don't need you, Jonathan. We don't need your name, your money, your belated validation." The silence that followed was broken by the chime of Sarah's phone. She glanced at the screen briefly. "It's the Mayo Clinic team," she said. "I need to take this. It's about the implementation program." Before stepping away, Sarah looked at Jonathan one last time. "I'll leave my daughters to decide if they want any kind of contact with you in the future. They're perfectly capable of making their own decisions. As for me, I don't harbor resentment, Jonathan. I simply don't have space in my life for you." As Sarah moved to the corner of the room to take her call, Jonathan found himself facing the three young women who were undeniably his daughters. Brilliant, confident, complete. In their faces, he saw not only his own features but primarily Sarah's strength and determination. "You have an amazing mother," he finally said. "We know," replied Olivia simply. "I should mention," added Emma, "that statistically, considering our academic and early professional performance, it's likely that all three of us will become significantly more successful than you. Economics, medicine, or law. We can choose any path," completed Sophia. "Mom taught us there are no limits to what we can achieve." Jonathan nodded slowly, the full weight of everything he had lost finally visible on his face. It wasn't just a family he had rejected, but an entire legacy. Days later, when Forbes published its cover story on Dr. Sarah Chen, the headline perfectly captured the essence of her journey. "The billionaire who refused Winthrop's acquisition. How Dr. Chen revolutionized American medicine and created her own empire." Winthrop Pharmaceuticals' stock fell 12% in the week following the conference, while Chen Cardiovascular Systems shares soared after the announcement of the NIH contract. Sarah, however, wasn't monitoring the financial markets that day. She was too busy helping Sophia with her bioengineering project, reviewing Emma's award acceptance speech, and watching Olivia's presentation at her school's legal debate. For her, the true wealth had always been there, not in the billions in her bank account, but in the smiles of the three extraordinary young women who proved every day that Jonathan Winthrop III's abandonment had been the beginning, not the end, of their family's greatest success story. If you enjoyed today's video, I'm sure you'll love the next one. Don't waste time. Just click on the screen.